Jai Jagat.
Jai Jagat.
We greet people now in India with Jai Jagat because we want to recognize each person as a member of the universal family. We think that's an act of peace. So if we can start that among our children, with our children and our grandchildren and the people we associate with. It sounds like a funny term, but in a way, it was a term that was developed by one of the disciples of Mahatma Gandhi. Can you hear? Okay, yeah. Vinoba Bhave. And Vinoba Bhave actually used it when he was talking with a bunch of people in Karnataka. And the Tamils felt that he was favoring Karnataka in the discussions. And so he came up with Jai Jagat, a position to, as you will, supersede borders and boundaries and have people identify with something in common rather than their differences. Hi, George. This is George. But anyway, in wishing you Jai Jagat, I want to first, since Indians tend to, Indian presentations, we spend 40% on the greeting and about 20% on the content, and then another 40% on the ending, But just in the greeting, I want to greet all of you and particularly thank Rekha Ben for organizing this event at the last minute. And say that I think Rekha Ben remembers that we were here 2 years ago in first presenting the idea of Jai Jagat, this idea of Jai Jagat campaign. And she saw the worthiness of getting an update and also seeing if we can get some people engaged. And so I thank you, Rekha Ben, for this. I also want to thank my dear friend Jag Mohanji, who has really traveled with us over many years, trying to understand all this Ekta Parishad and what you're really doing in India and what kind of meaning it has, and his dear wife. And they have really given us a kind of a feeling of a home in Ottawa, with their sons, I think, and in their home. So I just wanted to welcome and thank you both. And of course to Noel Salmon, who took quite a bit of interest, I think, from 2013 when we first met at Heather's meeting over there at St. Paul's, where you began to see that this whole nonviolence, which you've been teaching for so many years, has an interesting set of practices in India, and therefore showed great enthusiasm to link. Bill Beneja, of course, a longtime friend and colleague, and of course George, who's just come in, George, a Mennonite and deeply involved in peace, and Kuzma. So the list goes on and on. I just want to greet all of you and say that although I was identified as a coordinator of Jai Jagat, I have to also recognize that my partner and husband Rajgopal is really the leader of the Jai Jagat March, and he was here last time. He apologizes for not being here this time, but in giving you his greetings, he wanted to for me to tell you a little story, which I will do later in the fact that he's absent. So as part of and all other people, thank you for coming. I think this is something that I hope that we will have a little chance at the end to get your interaction and inputs into, and to see how we can take some of these ideas to our own constituencies here in Ottawa, and not just leave it as a nice talk, but to see it as a way to propel all of us into some form of action. Because I think nonviolence is well spoken, as Noel can I'm sure testify. There are many students who write brilliant essays, but it's also important to see that we make the world more nonviolent. So with that, I want to start. I'm just wondering if I'm in charge of the...
Do you want me to advance each?
No, I can do it if you just give me a sense of how to do it.
That's right.
Okay, perfect, perfect, okay.
should
So
have brought the
what we have, Jai Jagat 2020 Global Peace March, this is the logo. And what you have is a picture here is in 2012, we had a march of 100,000 people marching from a city called Gwalior, 350 kilometers from Delhi. And this 100,000 people who are gathered in the background, all landless, marginalized communities in India from all over the country, got together to march to Delhi to take the message, to voice the message of the land issue. It was specifically on their feeling that they're getting dispossessed from their land. And we actually only marched 12 days and we only got to Agra because the government came running to meet us and to negotiate a land reform. But the reason I raise this moment from 2012 to you is to tell you this was the moment when we believed that marching for peace can actually achieve something, that it's not just building goodwill. In this case, we were trying to change policies. But the Jai Jagat 20, which is also a march of, brings from the bottom, brings from the grassroots aspirations of people on this march as it proceeds from New Delhi to Geneva. Geneva being the head of the United Nations and one of the heads, one of the United Nations centers. And what is really interesting is that, and I want to flag this for you at the beginning while you're still really attentive, is that in villages in which we work, in a number of provinces, states in India, women are still putting into their sarvodaya patra, their little mud pot with Jai Jagat on it, 1 handful of rice and 1 rupee into that pot. And the pot is called the Jai Jagat pot. And so this is the base of the movement. It is not a Jai Jagat with, some funding organizations or a few Oxfam type organization. This is really from the grassroots because the women who are putting that money into the pot believe in Jai Jagat. What they believe in is that they can fight for justice, that they can fight for justice, and that Jai Jagat provides a space. It's not fighting for them, it provides a space, right? So that has grown out of the 2012, but it's really grown out of the marginalized poor. And what is really interesting is most of our campaigns in the world have come from northern agencies or northern citizens coalitions or northern dominated citizens coalitions. And what's really interesting about this is not only is it coming from India, but it's coming from the grassroots in India, which is representative of people who have felt excluded. And just to complete, before I move to the next slide, Jai Jagat has a sense of inclusion. It has a sense of inclusiveness in it. What it means is, it's really about victory to the planet. Jai is victory, so you say Jai Hind, victory to India. But this is not victory to India, this is victory to the planet and to all the living things in this planet. And it's kind of a higher level consciousness, It's not just about God bless America, but none of the other countries, or Vive la France, It's really about a victory or a long life too. It's wishing, it's like a salutation, long life to this planet with everything in it, right? And I think in this era where climate change has become a critical moment in our history, this makes a lot of sense, right? Because we know in climate, in dealing with this crisis, which is imminent, which I believe yesterday at your convocation, Paul Martin came to say this was one of the biggest problems that faces not only this university, but Canada and the world you know, is that if we're going to face Jai Jagat, we have to have a sense of doing it together. Otherwise, we'll work against each other on it. And that will create many, many problems, you know? And I think the wisdom that we draw, you know, from this Gandhian framework is to do it as some sense of commonness, of being on a common project and not working at cross purposes for our self-interest or our national interest. So I'm going to move to the next slide. One of the reasons, I mean, you're all from the Mahatma Gandhi Peace Council, so you don't need to know that this is the 150th year of Gandhi, but it's not just Mahatma Gandhi, it's also Kasturba, you know. I think this is forgotten, and having worked with women in India for 35 years in a Gandhian movement, I tend to make that point very often, that Kasturba was also born in this year, and she was also in her 150th year. And so we call it Ba Bapu, you know, 150 in India. We try to always say Ba Bapu, Ba being Kasturba, and Bapu being, of course, Gandhi. And the Jai Jagat scene, you know, we've talked a little bit about seeing all peoples as members of the university family. But of course, the main thing that we emphasize in this 150 years is the talisman, that when you're in doubt, think of the poorest person you've ever met, in order to frame your agenda, particularly your policy or your agenda. And I think the centrality to those most marginalized is fully coherent with what I just said about the Jai Jagat March, drawing from the grassroots, drawing from the most marginalized. And we hope that people who celebrate the 150th birthday, whether it's in Canada or it's in South Africa or it's in the People's Republic of China, that they think of their most marginalized, not just the development of the people who would be, say, middle-class communities. Of course, we want everybody to develop because it's an inclusive process, but we want an emphasis on those who are most voiceless. So that is something that we see as central. Of course, be the change you want to see in the world is something appealing to young people. And young people are important in this campaign. So, you know, in the wake of the deepening economic, social, and environmental crises, everywhere grows the desire for profound change in our way of life. The Jai Jagat campaign, a nonviolent campaign, is working to achieve a benevolent world for the whole of the living, where no one is left behind. And I think this gives it a more positive spin. I don't like to say the word spin, a positive perspective, because I think a lot of the climate soothsayers will make us feel that it's an urgency. Otherwise, the human population will begin to die and to become extinct. Whereas this sort of says we're at the moment to really make a different world. And so this positiveness is really, I think, very essential to the nonviolence that we're trying to raise in the march as we march for 1 year. It's a sense of the glass is half full, not half empty, that we've got lots of things that we can do. So many people are doing good things all around the world. Let us not talk about only about what is bad and anti-globalization and anti-Trump and anti-this and anti-that, but to really find the positive. And I think in my own years working in India, I have found that the only way to change the community level is to bring a positive approach, because negative only riles people up for a short period of time, but eventually they need to see some sort of positive trajectory, especially young people. We can come back to that. So, Jai Jagat, an urgent call for everyone to take action using nonviolence to come together to save the planet. Well, these are all big words, but basically the walk across, between Rajghat and Geneva is basically a learning journey on nonviolence. It's basically for people to learn and be nonviolent. That's what it is. And people who participate in it, who come for short periods of time, who look at it on their handset, the idea is for them to think of how they can be more nonviolent, you know. Basically, the idea is we can have a more nonviolent world. We could organize our society more nonviolently if we have strategies of being more nonviolent. If we have strategies which we can take up to be, you know, to practice nonviolence. We need the strategies. And if peace is the way to peace and not just some sort of goal of peace, then this is what we want to try to achieve in the Jai Jagat. And it's a social movement. Hello, how are you? It's also a social movement for global change. We are trying to bring people together from around the world. We'll talk about that in a minute. So we're going to Geneva. Why? I wanted to put this up front so that people who are thinking this is such a massive thing, what is it all for? What do you want to achieve with this? I mean, it's a great idea to have a satyagraha, but when Gandhi had his salt satyagraha, his salt march of 1930, it was very specifically to get salt, right? So that, Indians did not have to pay tax, and that they could show that their self-reliance was important. And we all know that the Salt March was the beginning of the end of the British Empire in India. So obviously, what is this, for peace and justice? Isn't this too vague? And what does it mean? And how do we really see what all this is about? And I think this notion of harmony as a means to inclusive development. In other words, if we're going to the UN in Geneva and they have their sustainable development goals, there's 17 sustainable development goals, and we're all getting our training on all of those goals, which is a very noble thing. They're all very inspiring goals. But you tell me, can we achieve any goal if we don't have nonviolence? If we don't have a more nonviolent world? How can we? How can you achieve those goals, right? So what is missing, I think, is the looking at the conditions for the achievement of those SDGs, And this is what we want to bring, but we don't want to bring it from academics. We want to bring it from affected populations who are saying, look, we're from, say, this part of the world, and we are suffering so much conflict in spite of our government talking about SDGs, We are suffering so much poverty in spite of SDGs. So we're trying to, get a better dialogue, because for us, that's one of the nonviolent strategies to get a more nonviolent world. So I just wanted to say that what is really interesting is that the UN in the SDGs says, no one left behind. That's their slogan. And we're trying to say, think of the poorest you've ever met in your life. So Gandhi's 150, marching to Geneva, is meeting SDGs, no one left behind. There's a convergence between East and West. Yeah? And I think this is really beautiful, because we're not here to say Gandhi is the only, leader, and that needs to be accepted by the Western world because it's his 150th birthday. No, I think what we're trying to say is we need a kind of a way of looking at no one left behind, and using a Gandhian perspective of looking at the poorest person you've ever met in your life. This is really, really helpful, they all reinforce inclusion. Now, here is the march. I don't have a poker stick, so I'll just, so this is 10,150 kilometers, what you're looking at. We've mapped it. It's crossing the Himalayas, the Caucasus Mountains, and the Alps. So it's no small thing. And when we first looked at it, we said, oh my goodness, how are we going to do this? So what we've come up with is the following plan, which I want to just share with you. Starting at of course, Gandhi's Samadhi, where his resting place in New Delhi, traveling through Haryana and Punjab, which I'll come back to the Wagah border, Pakistan border, and with 200 people. And once we reach Pakistan, have a meeting, and then probably, if at all, a few Indians will cross over, but it'll be mainly international. The Pakistan team will come and meet them, and we will spend 2 months in Pakistan, primarily driving, especially in the western region as we cross into Iran. And then we go into Iran. I'll go into a little more detail with this later. We go into Iran, we drive through Iran to this area here, just up here, which is known as the Caucasus, the former Soviet Union of Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia. We begin to walk through that area. We cross by boat the Black Sea, so this body of water you see. We cross by boat into the Balkans, walking through 4 Balkan countries, Bulgaria, Serbia, Bosnia Herzegovina, and Croatia. And then from there we cross at Slip, we cross to Italy over the Mediterranean, what is called the Adriatic, to Ancona in Italy. So we're now here, just up here, crossed into Italy. We then go to Assisi, up to Milano. Then we have to take a bus over the Alps to Brig. And from Brig, we have 21 days in Geneva. So I'll just run through these so you get a slightly, because I've got some of these mapped for you. Before, there are 200 walkers to Pakistan, and then so on and so on. Yeah. So here is Rajghat in Delhi. This is the march through India, and it'll be primarily in Punjab. And I have to say, the Sikh temples, the Gurdwaras have all opened their temples for us to stay, for 200 people to be fed almost every day out of temples, So normally this is being 500 kilometers. It says 30 days here, but this has been extended to 60 days. So now this is a little out of date. So we're 5 weeks in Punjab, and we'll go into villages. Basically, it's a 30-day march, which we're extending for 60 days, and we're hoping that from the Dalai Lama in Dharamshala, he will send a delegation to meet it, it will really have a good chance to have many youth trainings and a lot of discussions in India about Gandhi and this march. So that's Rajghat to the Wagah border. Then we get to the Wagah border, which is this, and a few will cross over. Now we're hoping that some Indians will come with us, but we're not sure of the ability to get the permissions. But we are holding a peace conference in January in Lahore in order to give the excuse for them to come. So this is basically from Lahore, we're driving down to Karachi, up to Quetta, to here, to the border. And we've asked the present Pakistan government to give us internal security to travel this way. That is with the army, with an army presence, so that there's no problem in driving in that region, because it is difficult. There's no doubt. And it'll be for the December, end of January period. And then we move across into Iran, and this is basically the route in Tehran for about 1 month. What we've initially thought is we would have to pay a travel agency, you know, a huge sum of money to keep us secure, but we've actually found many people have come forward now to, now the Indians who don't come through Pakistan will fly to this Shiraz from India and join the march. So that is the present planning there, to be in Tehran for about a month. Then to move to Navakchan, which is actually in Azerbaijan, and go through Armenia, which I believe is not mapped here. This now, so Armenia is here, come up, and now this is Georgia, coming through Georgia. Initially, we were going to go up to Uchamira, which is the Russian-occupied area, but now it seems it's going to come down to Batumi. It's very interesting because these are areas dominated by the Cold War, and so when we spoke to the president in Tbilisi, the president of Georgia, she said, no, you should go into the Russian-occupied because that's Georgia. Well, the Russians don't like that because they want it to be seen as Russia, even though this part of what is called Abkhazia has only been recognized by Nicaragua and Venezuela, I think, of only 2 countries. And so, but it has all the Russian forces like Crimea there. So then we realized that if we go into Abkhazia, we have to go into Russia to show the Russians that we're not just representing the Georgians, but we also recognize them. And then we realized that when we wrote to 200 Russians, they had little or no interest for our march into Sochi. So then we changed it. But at least we interacted, you know, and tried to show that we were trying to be above polarized politics of the marked by the Cold War. Then to go across to the Balkans, across the Black Sea, and from Varna, and then so this is Bulgaria, and then Serbia. This is all Bulgaria, to Sofia, and then the next one is shows the whole thing. So this is Bulgaria, and then you get into Serbia, and then you get into Bosnia, and then you get into Croatia to Split. So, you know, this is in the May-June period, whereas the Caucasus is in the March-April period. And then we go across to Italy. No, sorry, I went backwards. Then we go across to Italy, just a quick crossing of the boat. And then from Italy, we start in Ancona. We hope that the Pope will come. We're working with the Vatican to see if the Pope will meet us in Assisi. We march up to Milano, and then we have to pretty much take a bus in this part because this is really high Alps. And then we come down to Brig, and then 23 days through Switzerland. And you would be not surprised to know that the Swiss have organized all 23 days already, whereas all the rest of the march is still in process because the Swiss are so organized and keen about this march. And so as we enter Geneva through this long march, there's a group coming up from Senegal and one from Spain, and actually it's not here, but there's also one from Marseille, and then there's another one from Lyon, and then there's another one from UK, meeting the Lyon one, then there's Sweden and Germany, and then there's one from Belgium. So what we're hoping is on the 26th of September next year, 5,000 people will assemble in Geneva. And one of the beautiful things that's happened is the Geneva municipality and canton, so the province and the city of Geneva, have agreed to formally support this Jai Jagat and to help bill it up to 5,000 people for 8 days. You know? So this enables the people from Africa and poorer communities from Spain to come, people that may not have money in their pockets, but they can march in, right? And the reason that Geneva, you'd say, well, why would they bring so much trouble upon themselves, you know? And the reason they're doing it is because Switzerland is struggling as a society to still look as if it's open to refugees. It's still the UN, you know, the UN pays 20% of the city's costs, you know. So they have a big stake. And I think there's a real sense with the European Union and how things have been changing that they need to embrace this. And when we heard that about a year and a half ago, we felt confident enough to begin to organize this massive movement. And I'm just happy to report that I just sat, as did Rajghat, with the Swiss authorities in India, and they're working to give Schengen visas to all of these people who hardly have ever had passports, to be able to get their Schengen well in advance, which allows them to go through many, many other countries. So they're bending over backwards to make this possible. Now, you know, you may be thinking, how has all this happened? And I think at the beginning I tried to say that, you know, Hector Perichet has been working from the grassroots for a long time and building up a bottom-up kind of approach in development. We started in, you know, each of our activists has 10 villages, and then activists put each of the 10 villages together, so you get a regional organization, and then with the regional organization you affect state or provincial policy, and then with the provincial policy you affect national policy, and this is now working at an international policy level. But, you know, the question still remains, how do a few affected people from this level, how can they possibly articulate things at the international level? And I think the symbolism of linking the local to global is very important. And this is one thing I want to leave with this audience, is that if nothing else over the course of the year of this big march, we can do something in Ottawa locally and link it to the Jai Jagat, even though it may have not started, you know, a kind of a women's group in downtown Ottawa may have started well before the Jai Jagat, but if it gets linked to the Jai Jagat, it's linking local to global. And I think this is the kind of the importance, or the students. We were dealing with a bunch of students, and I was saying to our friend earlier, 15 schools in Edmonton through Reva Joshi, the woman that came and spoke 2 years ago. She's working with 15 schools and linking those schools and their community to this global vision. And this flips what we've normally had as a kind of a top-down globalization to a bottom-up globalization. It flips the metaphor, and it's not perfect, you know, but I think it's very educational for people to see that you don't need just a few billionaires to dominate an economy. You can actually be more inclusive in a development process. One of the things I just wanted to draw your attention to is that we've put together a green and white manifesto called the Jai Jagat Manifesto. And this is really drawing from these two planetary crises of conflict and climate. So how we're trying to frame it in violence and non-violence. So we're trying to say violence between each other, between human beings, and violence with the earth needs to be overcome if we're going to move towards a positive trajectory. So it's not just lowering the temperature and controlling greenhouse gases. It's also a more holistic thing of having a more non-violent relationship with each other and non-violent relationship with the earth. And we spell out, this is just, could be helpful to people, visions and values of the Jai Jagat, and that we take a certain kind of commitment, you know? I mean, Gandhi was well known for his vows. Before any satyagraha, the idea was you were taking a vow in a community and you had to do it because all of you were dependent on the carrying out of this vow, you know? And so the vow to personal change, the vow to, you know, protecting life, nurturing role of the earth, the vow towards nonviolent social action as opposed to violent social action, the vow, misspelled, the vow of nonviolence as a way of life, the vow to a global citizenship where we're all in some universal relationship with each other, and the vow for justice, human rights, and democracy, or Sarvodie, maybe. So I think these are the things that come out, but we also, in the manifesto, this 30-page document, talk about organizing for change. And we talk about Gandhi historically, but how to really reform education in a nonviolent way. How do you do that? How do you reform the economy? How do you do that? How do you reform our governance structure? How do you do that? This is synoptic. This is not comprehensive. This is not an academic work. But it gives people a reason for understanding why we need nonviolence as a way of organizing society also. We use equity as a way to organize society. We use sustainability to organize society, but we haven't really thought of nonviolence as a way of organizing society. And you may remember 2 years ago, Rajgopal talking about how important it was to integrate nonviolence into all the higher, the academic fields, whether there's, you know, the fields of physics, chemistry, biology, or the fields of education, journalism, and humanities, right? Is that we need to see things in reference to nonviolence. I spoke to, you know, Doug Roach, which many of you must know. Doug as the former UN ambassador to the UN and disarmament affairs and longtime advocate against nuclear weapons, lives in Edmonton, and really with Murray Thompson was probably our grandfathers of peace in this country. Sorry that Murray's no longer with us. And what he said is something very interesting. He said, we are moving from a culture of violence, a culture of war, he said, into a culture of peace. I mean, that's the large picture of history, that we're all, you know, moving in that direction, but there are small ups and downs, and we may be at a bit of a down point right now, but that doesn't mean the march of history is not moving in that direction. And I thought that was extremely interesting, that if we're marching, if our climate strikers, those youth who get out every Friday to stand up against climate change, these 15-year-old kids, if they really know more about nonviolence, they can sustain this struggle. Because my fear is they may not be able to sustain it, and they may get very, very cynical with the status quo. Any kind of struggle needs a sustaining value, you need to be really strong and courageous inside. That is what Gandhi helped to show in his life. And I think this is what we talk about in this Green Manifesto. Now, if I can move you now into the 4 phases of the campaign, we've been doing a lot of nonviolent training, local action, huge youth engagement in India. The base, besides the rural women and the rural communities I mentioned, we have a huge youth presence in this Jai Jagat campaign. And the Global March, of course, is our phase 2, and coming to Geneva is phase 3. But we're not without thinking what's beyond that. Awareness for what? Beyond. You know, a good meeting in Geneva, lots of recommendations, goodwill, people go home happy. But what's really beyond? And I think that we have to, in all our capacities, think through. Clearly, from our point of view, we're going to take the global back to India and work at the local and national level to see the implementation of the SDGs are done in the spirit of nonviolence. We do have some social media campaigns going on. So Bhopal and Delhi, we have our website and lots of youth engaged, but we've set up a social media unit in Dakar, one in Rome, Italy, one in Atlantic Canada now. And I think these are very, very important for posting local events in relation to the international, but also to get the word out as the march, the virtual march, is taking place over the next year. The Geneva Action, yeah. So, sorry, this is a little bit run into each other, but so once we're in Geneva, we're really building on case studies from the grassroots and creating dialogue with different institutions, creating recommendations. So it is centered on a dialogue process, and we do have many big meetings planned. There's a World Peace Forum in Geneva. There's a World Forum on Nonviolent Economy, a Leadership Women's Forum, Gandhi's Relevance in the 21st Century. So all of these will be, you know, several hundred people in discussion in Geneva over the 8 days. And of course, the real 4 pillars of our advocacy is eliminating poverty, reducing social discrimination, addressing climate change, and reducing conflict. What's I think important about this is we're trying to show the holistic nature, you know, of a new, you know, if we're pushing for a new development model based on the SDGs, what we want is, we don't want everybody to be in their silos of climate, in their silos of social solidarity economy, in their silos of peace, but we want to see how that can get integrated, you know, because I think that's the benefit of a Gandhian perspective. And what can people in Canada do? Well, I just wanted to say I've been about 2 weeks in Canada. I've traveled to Halifax, or I've traveled to Atlantic Canada, Western Canada, Toronto, and now Ottawa. And I found that there's a social media unit now, has been just a Facebook page, but you know, that is doing some work there. We've got a communication group in Southern Ontario outside, you know, with people coming together in Toronto. We have this teachers group in Western Canada. You know, because this is the Mahatma Gandhi Peace Council, I wanted you to know that the Mahatma Gandhi Foundation in Edmonton sponsored a social event when I was there, raised several $1,000s just as a beginning, but are planning many other events. And in the Toronto meeting, some of the Hamilton, Mahatma Gandhi, and Pearson was there, and they're looking at doing something on October 2nd where they bring the Jai Jagat into play. They're not just having the annual lecture on Gandhi, but they're actually also saying something about Jai Jagat, because that will be the launch in India. So to do something here will then, you know, it'll be done concurrently. There's been some small fundraising efforts, and this is per marcher is about 14,000 Canadian dollars for 1 year per marcher. So we're trying to raise, we're still raising money per marcher for the 50 marchers. We're raising money for the various peace conferences that will be held along the way. And we're raising money for the launch and the finale in Geneva. So anywhere we're looking for small fundraising. We don't want large fundraising. We are looking for some institutional funds, but the strength of this is the 1 rupee and the handful of rice, you know? Everybody giving something small, but of themselves, to contribute and to be engaged in this campaign. There is an effort by one group, I can give you the brochure, of having marches in Canada. They've got the idea that if everybody clocks their time, because you can do that on the Fitbit watches, is that what they're called?
Bitfit.
Pitfits, yeah. Pitfit watches. Then you can calculate whether you know, if you get a group of, so if the Mahatma Gandhi Peace Council all decides to do walking, and when they get to 10,000 kilometers collectively, then they can register that they've gone 10,000 kilometers, which is equivalent to the Long March. Yeah. So once you do that, then the idea is to get a sponsor to back you up for having completed 10,000 kilometers, right? So that's a little project that they're working on in Atlantic Canada. The idea of joining the marches or any one of the marches, some of the Quakers in Toronto want to join the Quakers in UK to walk to Geneva. Yeah, so maybe some of the people who love French may want to join the French March from Marseille. That's on a water issue. Some of the European marches are on different topics, like there's a Marseille to Geneva march, which is on water. There's the Belgium marches with donkeys and staying with farmers on agroecology. The Quakers are coming with their women and poor women from the Birmingham, I would say poor, a lot of Indian poor and other new British people coming from Birmingham on the Quaker walk. So like that, each has their own theme that they're trying to talk about. One of the things they talked about in Toronto, which I thought was really interesting, is whether we could get journalist students to come to different marches and write and send stuff back to Canada, because we've had tons of marches in India, but none of you have heard about it. I mean, we had to come and tell you after the fact. So it would be such a shame if these marches were not really in the media, because a lot of the media is controlled by corporate media houses who may find it rather boring. I mean, maybe a small article may come out and then that's it. But if we had, journalist students, and given Carleton's strong journalism school, it just strikes me that this may be an area that would be, not just to come to the Long March and maybe have 2 or 3 in relay for the Long March, but also to the other marches, so that this whole, the Belgium donkeys and the Marseille water, and the one coming on rural economy initiatives from Senegal, these get captured in the media and help with education. Because I think, and this is where I want to begin to conclude, the whole idea of this is to work on education. It's to work on educating young people and getting them to, think of peace and nonviolence. Nonviolence not as not violence. Not to be dragged into the violence side, but to really look at ahimsa. Nonviolence, an integrated category of how to act, in your life nonviolently. And so this is an amazing opportunity that could be used by teachers, by civil society groups, by government, So I promised to tell you a small story from Rajghat, and so I just conclude with that, which is that Rajghat was in Rajasthan last week to find out that the government of Rajasthan, which is Ashok Gehlot, got elected as the chief minister there, has decided to set up a Department of Peace. And they're taking it really seriously, and they feel that they could be the first of a number of provinces. So he wanted me to share the fact that that there's still a deep interest in peace and nonviolence in India, in spite of media reports that tend to show the other side, the side where peace is not strong in India. So I think this is a good testament. Above Congress and BJP politics, I think there's still a very deep, deep interest in doing various things in India, and and that is what really propels us to have the confidence in doing this campaign, and to bring this to you today. So, and my final statement is that I came to Canada for this 2 weeks. It was a bit expensive, and we had all sorts of, decisions where we put every pie of our money. But basically it was because I felt very strongly that I wanted to come back and be with Canadian family and friends, and before I endeavor to take on this satyagraha, because it's a long walk, and I'm not young, as you can see, evident that I'm not young, but I take this because I've seen the force of these marches and what they can do, and I just want to bring all of you along.